To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast, ladies and gentlemen, gardeners and homesteaders, beekeepers, and anybody who's just curious about gardening. You're at the right place. It's Thursday. It is a Thursday show, right, Batavia? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We just had our fall run go, so I'm a little confused on what we're doing here. But yeah, you saw the title. You know, we're going to dive into this today. And I don't think Batavia is very excited about it, but I think it's going to be very useful. Because, I mean, everybody hates weeds, don't they?
No one likes weeds. Yes, everyone hates
My
weeds.
wife likes to weed.
Oh, well,
she's an angel for that. Except for she only does it like once a year, so I guess we take away her angel wings because of that. But she likes to weed. She likes to dig trenches. So she always tells me I better watch out because if she wanted to kill me, she could dig my grave and then weed the grave and make it look good. So that's a dark part of our marriage.
That's something to keep your mind on. Now everybody else knows something happens to you. It'd be like one of those "don't F with cats" kind of series.
Oh, dude!
Man.
If anything ever happens to me, they can just refer to this episode and it's over. So it's the cat's out of the bag.
It's did I tell you about the guy across the alleyway that was like, he saw me on 2 different occasions. I can't remember if I shared the story on the podcast. So the short version is, the first time he sees me, he's probably, I'd have to guess, maybe in his 60s, so he's a little older than me. And he's like, you know, you sure do work a lot. You know, I was in the alley, and I'm rarely in the alley. I was in the alley in my garage doing something. And he's like, you ain't got no man or anything? It's like, you know, you can hire somebody to do this stuff. So then you fast forward a few weeks later, he sees me again. I'm not really working that day. And then he's like, you don't have any children, any sons? Like, you know, and so I thought about it because I don't enjoy doing any of that work. Like, but it's just necessary, right? Like, I'm doing it because it needs to get done. And that's how I feel about weeding. Like, there is no satisfaction, you know, that I get from it.
Until you're done.
And
until you're done.
Yep.
It's one of those instant gratification tasks, you know, like as soon as, like, it's not like planting a garden and waiting 2 months to see it. It's like you weed and you're like, oh, wow. Okay. We're good to go.
Yeah.
So I think that's why my wife likes it so much. And just if you tell that story in the future, make sure there's nobody new around because you kept saying I was working the alley or in the alley. Very suggestive. So let's just take it easy, everybody.
I can neither confirm nor deny. Listen.
But look, everybody, we're going to get into this. And this was actually sent to our email. And we realized that, like, hey, we've never really done a weed centric episode because it's just something we all take for granted. But I think there's a lot to be learned from this. But before we get into that, I want to go ahead and just take a chance to tell you guys about our sponsor, the Planter app. Check it out because I don't think they have anything in there for weeds yet. Maybe they do. No, they don't. But it would be funny if they did add something for weeds as a little inside joke for all the Backyard Gardeners listeners. But the drag and drop interface, the square foot gardening setup that it's got, big gardens can be put in there. You can decorate them. You can add plants, take them away, flowers, track your seeds, all that good stuff. Use it on your phone, your tablet, and your PC. I'm telling you, try using it on a computer. Just do it on your work computer. You know you can. You're already watching YouTube videos on there. Do something useful. And check it out. It's the Planter app. It's available on the Google and Apple Play Store. If you want to use it in your computer, you just do it through that. And then you can sign in online into it. I don't know if I've ever said that out loud, but there's a link below to get you a discount. So check that out and start planning your garden because it'll take your garden to the next level as it has ours. Big shout out to the Planter app. So thank you. Okay. Let me pull up our glorious email that we got.
Yeah, there's something, it's, you know, we talk often about like the parts of gardening that aren't sexy.
This is
right?
the unsexiest thing about gardening.
yeah, we don't talk about all of them, but we do try to hit on some of those. And this is just it's either you have them really, really, really bad, or you don't have them that bad, or you basically kind of don't have them at all, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm probably in that middle category. And there's a part of it that I probably take for granted because of it.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why I'm like, absolutely super excited about this episode. Hear the sarcasm.
Yeah. So actually, I've gone back and forth in my garden with weeds. I've had them really bad. I've had them not bad. And it's funny, and this has no bearing on why I've really wanted to do this episode, and Batavia's kicking and screaming the whole way. I'm just joking, kind of. But this year, I kind of noticed where my weeds are coming from. So I'm kind of excited to share that. And it's stupid, but it's part of it. You know what I mean? It's like a stupid reason to have weeds. So, all right. So let me make sure I get the name right today. Yes. Katie.
Hey, Katie.
Hey there. She says, wow, war on weeds. I'm losing this all to that creeping weed. It's been a huge struggle. Hand pulling made it worse. I'm staying away from any herbicide, but it's taking over my whole backyard. I've removed lawn and planted garden with deep mulch where it was really bad. And sadly, now it's really bad everywhere. Please help. From a fellow Chicagoan. Katie!
Katie! Hey, Chicago neighbor.
So
I got so excited I forgot to hit the bell
I know,
again.
I figured you're going to go crazy with it. So yeah, it's it's one of those things, like weeds are so tough. And I was just doing a shout out, I can't remember who it was. I believe it was Laura. She came on to one of the lives I was doing on Sandy Bottom Homestead, and she brought up my fire pit. And she made me gag because I was like, I don't want to talk about my fire pit. It's pissing me off. But, it's been something I've been struggling with the weeds for years. And, planting a garden where weeds are is not always the best option, but there's a way to get around it. So, the question we have to ask is, are weeds really, what is the purpose of them? Are they good at all? And there's arguments for both sides. Do you have an opinion on this at all?
Well, I mean, are we going to look at this as whatever the gardener considers a weed is a weed? Like, the whole idea of a weed is anything you don't want to be in a place, right?
This is the hard thing about weeds. And I mean, look, let's be honest. We could break down and just talk about each individual weed, which would be, you could have a whole podcast about weeds only at that rate. Mm-hmm. But I think anything that's like overall considered a weed, not like, oh, I've got this flower, like this beautiful flower that's seeded here and I don't want it here. But it'll all go in together. But for this part of the conversation, before we get into getting rid of weeds and, the times of year and stuff like that and different types, I think anything like a grassy type of weed, cloverish types of weeds. I don't really know the names of all the weeds. So there's that. But what I do know is how to get rid of them. Does that help?
Yeah, I think we can schedule for this episode when it drops to post in the Facebook group, Backyard Gardens Community Garden, a picture of my living backyard with weeds. I have so little earth in my backyard. Owners before me paved basically the entire backyard, and that original strip on the side of the fence where the cage baby is now was the only dirt. There was dirt on the sides of the house and the sides of the garage. And one year I didn't plant my garden into July, which I've told you about before, but I don't often mention the condition of that space. There were 6 feet tall weeds in that little space of growing. There were weeds growing between the cracks in the concrete patio. So I think that, obviously there's this idea of weeds being unsightly. They are, and oftentimes grow wild. So there's no level of manicure look. I think that especially because there's a certain level of like a manicured lawn that even with gardens, we still kind of have, at least our generation above and below us as well. I think we still kind of have that in our mindset. Like if it's unsightly, then it's a problem, you know. I don't give any thought to, you know, the birds, the bees, the insects that are feeding on the flowers that come up with weeds that, you know, that are eating the weed seeds and all of that. Like I honestly have no desire to be supportive to nature in that way. You know, I don't want to have to navigate through all of that stuff. So long and short, are weeds bad was the question.
Are they good, or, you know?
I talk my way into.
We'll get into why
I don't
they're bad.
think for me and my space and most people that are listening to this podcast that are trying to grow something, I'm going to say no. I mean, the only caveat is it's better to grow something than nothing.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily sign up to
that. Well, you know,
for weed's sake.
I saw a video one time, don't know where it was or what it was. And then I read something that was like, look, if you have a bare bed and you've got weeds growing in it, it's not a bad thing because it's keeping the soil active. So, you know, that's one thing to kind of think about. And then, you brought up the pollinator situation, and, you know, you're talking to somebody who raises bees, and the weeds are very important for them because of the time of year. You know, we're talking about right now, we're focusing on like summer, and there is not a lot of flowers in summer overall that provide stuff, you know, protein, heavy pollens and sugar-rich nectars. You know, like your beautiful flowers and stuff, they don't necessarily carry that kind of stuff in there that you think. It's a misnomer that all flowers are good for pollinators. That's not true. Yes, the weeds do have a purpose for that. And then, you know, again, to keeping the soil active, I find that very interesting. And ever since I read and saw it, I try to keep one foot in both lanes. You know what I mean? Like I kind of look at it and say, like, is it really bad? How's it going? You know, what can we do about it? How far am I willing to let it go? And I'll let it go to an extent, but I mean, right off the bat, and this is just before we start getting into it, you cannot let something that's a weed take hold in your space. That's like, you'll have, I mean, I think Katie's haven't seen that. It's really hard to get rid of it once it gets solidified in that space. Just like with my fire pit, like it's there and I can't do it. Yeah. So it's really hard. And then asking the question of like, well, why is it bad for a garden? You know, why are weeds bad for a garden? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is weeds need nutrients to grow. Right. You know, and so whatever is growing in a space is using that nutrients. And if you're in a garden and if you're growing in rows and containers, which I think generally have less problems with weeds, they're not eliminated. But if you're in raised beds and there are weeds there, something that could be your plant could be feeding off of your vegetable plant, your herb, your fruit plant. Guess what? Those weeds are feeding off of it instead. The water that's, you know, the good Lord is letting down, or that you're doing, you know, when you're watering your garden. Guess what? Guess who's also drinking that water?
And the other problem is, I mean, they overcrowd, and they will actually choke out your plants.
That's the wild nature of it, baby.
I know we've all seen it. Like you have a bed that's real weedy, and then you go clear it out, and it's like all of a sudden your plants start doing better. You know, so I think that's a big part of it. And I think all three of those are the main issues. I mean, unsightliness, whatever, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So I'm not overly, you know, concerned about that as far as this discussion goes, because I've seen some stuff that's weeds that are actually pretty, you know, it's very few and far between. But I've definitely seen some, and I've looked at them, and I mean, again, I have no clue what they are. But I thought to myself, like, if there's a whole field of this, it'd be kind of attractive. You know, I just had somebody comment the other day on my YouTube channel, Sandy Bottom Homestead, that they had morning glories were taking over their yard. And that's one reason why I've always heard morning glories can become very invasive. And so I've always kind of steered away from planting them for that exact reason. And I mean, that can be considered a weed. As beautiful as it is, you know, that's a weed. So you start getting to multiple, definitions of weeds at this point.
I have a package of Morning Glory seeds, and I learned about them after I bought the package of seeds, and I've not planted them for that exact purpose.
I have a package right there. Same thing. I'm looking at them. Same thing. And I just got to get rid of them. Because it's one of those things that just, it's the nature of the plant. Mm-hmm. So, and now different seasons bring different types of weeds. And so that's really important. And I know she said she didn't want to use herbicides. A lot of people use like weed and feed in their yards and stuff like that. And I think there's a responsible way and an irresponsible way to use this stuff. So if that's something that people, I use it minimally in my yard. And the reason why I use it for my yard, not my garden, is to kind of keep the grass there, because the grass helps with erosion. So, the weeds, they will come, but then they'll die back and leave bare spots. So that's kind of where we sit with that. I try not to do a whole lot of it, but I do what I can to manage it. But, fall will bring certain kind of weeds, and winter here, and then summer will bring like your dandelions and, stuff like that. And so all of that kind of spread about is an issue. There's a lot of ways to manage them, which we're going to get into very quickly. But do you notice different types of weeds in your area? Different seasons? Yeah,
I can't think of the name of it, but what you probably are describing as a winter weed, it's probably like the super early spring weed. And there's the moment of like something's actually growing. Like as we break out in Chicago, out of winter going into spring. Now, what I have found is this particular type of weed basically dies back and it's done. And of course, it's going to return next year, but it really doesn't cause me and my garden many problems. The weed seeds, if I look at like fall, is probably the moment for me. Like if I'm going to eradicate anything, hence the reason why I, against my will, I'm doing this episode now. Like we're going to talk about some prevention methods. And, I know this is like, we're in the midst of summer, like fall is approaching. We have so many other things to consider. As much as I hate to admit it, this is important.
It is.
Right. So the struggle I have with weeds in 2025 will be dictated by what I do starting in these next few weeks, going into the next couple of months. So I definitely do see a difference from season to season. They're most apparent and they run most rampant because of the conditions that, most summers give you, rain, it's hot, just like your vegetables are growing. Those weeds are growing too. They thrive
in those conditions, though. They thrive in drought. They thrive in lack of nutrients, So when they're thriving like that, and then you introduce nutrients and water to it, then, it's rocket fuel, and we see it. It's really, really bad here in the fall and winter and early spring when certain weeds will take hold. I know we get like pigweed, and I get that around my carrots. You said in the last episode, or maybe it was off air, that you said your onion bed was really weedy, wasn't it? Dude, mine gets so bad. It's unreal.
So the bed that I have the onions in now is one of the beds in the cage, baby. And every year I see the same weeds over there. This year I didn't mulch as heavy as I normally would. Right. And whatever I normally grows on a stem or a stalk in that space. And so I'm able to kind of get around it. Like last year I weeded maybe twice during the season, and we're talking about leaning in and pulling a few weeds. Like I'm going to really need to dig deep once I pull these onions up. By the time you hear this, the onions will be out. And it's the invasive kind. It's kind of that kind of grassy type, the long vines. It absolutely, the root of them are coming from basically under the fence from my neighbor's yard, because there's still grass there. It's a pain. It's on that side of the house. I have that problem from one end to another. And that's also where, I don't remember now either if we were just talking amongst ourselves or if this was another episode, but I'm watching the weeds grow up and I've pulled them once, which is probably like 30, 45 minutes in like a bag full of weeds. And I didn't get to the point where I could pull all of them. And now they're flowering, which is like, they're pretty yellow flower. But guess what's going to happen? It's going to dry up, and then it's going to dump them into the cage baby.
Yeah.
I need to, again, I did mention this last time. I got to get over to my neighbor's side of the fence.
I do remember you mentioning it. And that's the other issue is the weeds don't even really come from your space. It'll come from other spaces.
Well, it depends on how you look at it, because the interesting thing here is a lot of times when you weed, you have access to the entire space. For this, I can never clear it because, and I didn't have this foresight when I had the cage baby built. I basically am trapping the weeds from the outside of the cage baby to my neighbor's fence. So they're growing in this little compact area. So I really have to maneuver to try to get them to pull them. I'm never clearing the space ever. And even if I clear it in the early spring, there's like tens of thousands, if not more, of weed seeds that are just sitting in the soil in between us anyway. That's the thing too. As you get into it, as we get into getting rid of weeds, they'll stay dormant into the weeds. And so a lot of times what will happen is you'll come out, you'll weed it really good. The ground will look good, and then you'll till it. And what you're doing is you're tilling up old weed seeds and bringing them back up to the surface, which is why a lot of people scream no-till from the rooftops. But a little word about no-till is very misleading, because it's not really no-till, it's not a lot of till. Not continual till.
You're still turning your soil over.
It's not as catchy.
It isn't as catchy. And so I think a lot of people, there's some very big no-till people out there. I'm not going to say any names, but if you watch them and look at what they do, they still turn their soil over. And what that does is that's going to, at first, it's going to bring up the weeds seeds. And so, the obvious first method to get rid of them is just hand pulling them. But you got to stay on top of it, and we got to understand one thing is, how do weeds spread? And the common thought is, well, they spread by seed, but that's not always the case. They can spread by rhizome, roots, stuff like that. And that's the hard one to get rid of, because it'll put down, and then the roots will go, and they'll go under structures and anywhere they want, and then they'll pop up. I had one, I can't remember. It was in my greenhouse one year, and somebody commented what the weed was, and I confirmed that's what it was. It's like shepherd's ear, lamb's ear. Not lamb's ear is like a plant, but whatever it was, it definitely, like, I'd pull it, and as I'd pull it, I would see roots like every 6 inches coming down. So that's how it was spreading. And so, the roots would come up, and then I'd find offshoots of it. And I just continually kept pulling those weeds over and over, and finally got a hold of them. And I used a couple different methods. So, it's not just hand pulling them. And if they get out of control, it's a continuous effort. That's what's really important. Like, it's one of those things you cannot give up on.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely will. And I had that same kind of like rhizome type of, that's what's happening in the cage baby. That's what happens every year to a degree. And I mean, I've pulled, like, if I don't watch myself, I'm going to fall back. Like, it's just that it's taking that much of a hold. But it's also weed seed that's blown around. Yep. Right. It's also, if I'm weeding at a time where weed seed is already produced, I'm just digging my own weed grave, because as I pull those weeds, I'm dropping those seeds all over the place too, which is again why, still in the thunder of like, got to get to it before it produces seeds. Got to get to it before you produce seeds.
So I was recently, my buddy who does bees with me, he went on vacation. And so I went to his house to take care of his bees. And when we came back, I was talking to him. I was like, man, you got to get out here and cut this golf course. He's like meticulous about his lawn. It's perfect. And my son goes over there, and there was a dandelion. And so he picked it up and he blew it. And he was like, what are you doing? You just blew 500 weed seeds all over the yard. And my son's like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. And I'm like, it's all good. He was like, I'm just joking, but can we not do that anymore? You know, because that's exactly what, I mean, it's the dandelion, you know, how many people pick it up and blow it, make a wish or whatever. And all it's doing is spreading that seed everywhere. And you don't necessarily see it right away. It may be next year before it comes back. So it's one of those things that it's like we don't really think about. And as time goes by and we do different things in our gardens and our yards, it compounds and it gets worse and worse. You know, I fight crabgrass a lot. And I mean, it comes up and you don't even think about it, but it's dropping seed the whole time. So, you know, you look at it and it's like, well, how do I get rid of it? And it's like, I'm about to go through this right now with what was formerly known as a wild garden. So when I move it, I'm going to pick up those beds, move them out of the way, but the soil that's there, I'm just going to leave it. And I'm going to kind of rake it out to give myself like a soil bed of some sort to plant in, but it's got weeds in it. And it's always had a hard time. I mean, when I first tilled it, the weeds were 6 feet high. Now you can see that I've gotten them under control. And the key really is keep working in it, keep planting in that soil, keep at it, and just keep weeding around it. And you will eventually get a hold of it. It's not terrible right now, but I have areas around it, which is the key here, that will grow up and then they will throw seed into it. So what I was referring to in my yard, like around the garden, I have my pathways. I don't stay on top of cutting them like I should. And I mean, basically my push mower died. I don't have one, so it's kind of a pain. But on the edges of all the beds, I've got weeds growing on only the edges where the plants are coming up and they're dropping seeds into the raised beds. And so that's what I'm fighting with. So as you look for these things and you see it, you know, you've got to understand that it's not just like what's in there. It's also like what's right outside your bed. And so we really need to try and be better at keeping on top of it and keeping them cut back and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that it can't take the wind out of your steam when it comes to, like, it's almost like this notorious pest. You know, like, you know, it's going to happen. I think a part of the reason why it's easier for me to get up when I'm able to get up and get out into the garden for a new season is because I don't have those troubles. Yeah. My troubles don't come until later in the season. Now, again, as you'll see in the picture, if I let things go, I've literally let things go. Like, you know, something's going to grow in my space. I got a green thumb, boy. Look, you know, I'm growing 6 feet tall weeds. Yeah. I think, though, that just like a lot of other things when it comes to gardening, you got to come up with a system, right? You know, once you're able to come up with a system for weed control in your particular growing space, then it's almost like there's a win because you have now taken control over the situation. What's
your system?
So
your average system, not like I got a major problem, but like your dated, know.
Yeah. So I weed in the spring before I plant anything. And it's primarily in the backyard and then around the perimeter, like in mulch and everything. My raised beds that sit in the middle of the yard, in the backyard, and in the front yard don't have a lot of weeds. Right. But for the areas that do, I do like a clear cutting of weeds, and I'm pulling them by hand.
Okay.
And then I apply heavy mulch. Right now, I'm still using shredded leaves. So if at some point between planting and crops coming up, I mulch those beds heavily, and that buys me a lot of time. I come in probably 2 to 3 times, like on an intentional basis, where I'll spend a couple of hours weeding after it's rained. Like, that's my number one rule, right? This is before anything's produced a weed seed, so it's not promoting the spreading of the weed seeds, but it's much easier to pull. And then I was doing this and I saw a gardener mention this, and I'm like, it's spot on. And it sounds like, it sounds a little odd. I basically work my way backwards. Like, so if the space that I'm in, like the cage maybe is 30 feet long, I'm going to back up as I weed because it's encouraging to see the clear space in front of me versus all of the weeds that I have in front of me.
Right.
That makes sense?
Absolutely.
And then by the time I get to October, kind of what's there is there.
Yeah.
That's I kind of throw in the towel by then. Again, if I do see things that are close to producing a weed seed, I'll pull those. Those are things that, again, that are a bit taller. But everything else, I just let the winter
But you know
kill.
that those October weeds that you see, that's that next season weed kicking in. You know what I mean?
Of course
And so
it
it's
is.
like we're across the board. I feel like many people are pretty good about staying on top of summer weeds. But as it gets cooler, I think it's natural just to be like, well, I'm tired, whatever. And then that's how they take hold. And the thing is like you can go out there and pick the weeds, and we've danced around this a lot, and we need to just come out and say it. You can't let the weed drop the seed. End of story. It cannot drop the seed. If it drops the seed, you just set yourself back. So
burn the whole garden down.
Basically, bare minimum, you see that weed starting to go to seed, you need to go out there and at bare minimum just cut it. So that it'll, and then, that's like when I grew up, we would always cut the grass and it was always weeds, but we were always like, look, it's manicured weeds. It looks good. And then my parents one day were like, oh, well, I'm just going to go out there and put weed and feed down. And we literally had like 2 sprigs of grass left. You know what I mean? Like we had never had grass, but we never knew it because we just always kept it manicured. And so it was what it was. But if you see those weeds, stay on top of it. But you get into the fall and the winter, and then it's like, well, it's all done. But see, it's not done because, and this is why we're talking about it today, because this is a perfect time to jumpstart on it. Because what we want to do is we want to warm that soil up to get those weeds to germinate. So you can get like a big dark tarp and put down on that plant, on that bed, and that heat will cause it. Go ahead, mix it up. Stir it up, get those weed seeds up, and you put it down. And when it heats up, they'll germinate, but they'll cook underneath, and then they'll die because there's no light. So you can't put a clear piece of plastic down, clearly. Get something dark, and then put it down. And then you're going to start taking over. So, in the wintertime, it's like making money while you sleep. It's like, it's doing it for you when you're not even using this bed anyways. So it's like, just use it to your advantage. And that's a really good way to do it. I know some people will go, I don't know, I need to figure out where, but they can get like the billboard tarps that they use on the side of the street, billboards, and they'll put those in their yards and do big sections of that. So that's something you can do as well. But that's a really, really good way to kind of get that. We got to work on that weed seed bank. So we eliminate adding weeds, and then you got to cook those weeds and get them to germinate and kill them.
Yeah, we talked about the different types of weeds, but I think there's a moment we need to give to the different areas weeds are, right? So you have, let's say, a space you plan on growing in, and it's just a blank space. And that tarp is a great example of how you can kill weeds off for that space to be used. You can kill the grass off as well. A clear raised bed, meaning like, all right, the bed doesn't have anything growing in, that tarp is another method. I still handpick those things, but that's another way. So those are 2 different kind of spaces that weeds can appear. But there's also a third, and that's like in the crevices.
Yeah.
Right. That's in the cracks, on the side of the house. That's, in that space on the side of the porch where I didn't put enough river rocks there and weeds are coming up. There's time I spend on the side of my house in the backyard every year on the side of the porch pulling weeds, and it's more of it's a broadleaf type weed that's, I'm sure it's some part of everywhere, but it is not native. It is known in Illinois as well. And
it's a very special Illinoisan weed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Only found
once you cross the county lines, then you're gifted
What county
this
is
weed.
it? Cook?
Broadleaf plantain.
That's what county you live in?
Oh,
Chicago?
yeah, Cook County. I thought you were talking about the weed. Cook County, yeah.
No.
But, and, funny enough, a lot of these weeds are kind of pretty when they first start. Right. And they similar to, because we keep saying don't let the weed seed drop. They go through the same life cycle as, one of your brassicas leaves, the actual leaf. That at some point, most of these are flowering to some degree. And then at some point that finishes that part of its life cycle and it goes on to produce that seed. The seed is on the plant. And by then you're in the danger zone. Because any steps you take, you have an opportunity to dislodge that seed. Exactly. And these seeds are so fine, you'll never be able to collect them all.
No. And the thing is like, in my fire pit, I put down weed fabric. And that's all fine and dandy. But once the seed drops on the weed fabric, it's just the same thing. Because you get decomposing matter that creates soil, basically. And because weeds are so prolific. And, I say that, but one year, 2022, I went out there and I had some Napa cabbages. And I saved the seed from them. And I spilt seeds everywhere. Dude, I had Napa cabbages growing in all my driveway. And they never got big. I mean, they never got more than an inch tall because, they just couldn't. But everywhere. I was like, look, there's vegetables growing all over the place. I got them going in the damn driveway. And so it was like, it was just really eye-opening that it's like these like plants will grow anywhere they can to whatever ability they have. But when you talked about like on the sides of the house and stuff like that, and you'll always have nooks and crannies with weeds. But if you take down the big majority of them, you will make a dent in it. And I mean, think about it. If you take an 8 by 14 foot tarp, and you put it down on a weed bed. Now, first of all, let me say this. You don't just go to the weed bed and throw a tarp on it. You've got to go cut it down first. And then you put your tarp down. And you eliminate that patch of weeds, you're going to make a much bigger dent than if you focus on the side of your house pulling up 15, 20 weeds. You know what I mean? I mean, a lot of people, especially if you live in a more wooded area, you're going to have a plethora of stuff like that. So it's a really good place to use it. Getting into the herbicide discussion, though, how do you feel about herbicides in general? Not if you use them at your place, but like in general, are you against them or?
I think in general, I'm neutral in the use what you need to use for your space. I don't think that it's reasonable to expect to have to clear every weed, to never have weeds growing. I think you really have to pick and choose your battles. Sometimes I weed on the side of the house. Sometimes I don't. This year I've kind of let it go. Right. And so again, we're not at the point now where I need to make that decision. But I could be, let me say it this way. The weeds on the side of the house won't stay on the side of the house if I let them go for the entire year. They will travel. So I've considered using something like, an herbicide on the side of the house because I think I'm never going to grow food there, But there's a part of me that also says, why invest in that industry anymore? Why? This, I guess, the more political part of the gardener in me. Do without if you can help it. So I am not one for quick fixes when it comes to the garden world. You probably picked that up over the years. That doesn't mean I'm not about quick fixes in other parts of my life, because you better believe after that first day in the garden, I'm taking some Tylenol. First day of the first of spring. I think if I can wave a magic wand, I'd wave them all away. Herbicides.
I wouldn't. And I think there's a use for it. You've got a space and it's just absolutely out of control. I don't see a problem with adding the herbicide to knock it back and then start your organic method. Use a companion method of it. I don't really see a problem with that. What I see a problem with is there's a weed, just like you said, let me nuke them. I have a friend, if he sees a weed, he's got the Roundup bottle in his hand. I can't tell you the last time I bought Roundup. I've definitely bought it, especially for troublesome areas. I've sprayed it on that fire pit and it killed it, but then it just came back. So I think I did it twice. And I was like, you know what? This isn't working. What we've decided to do is just give it back to the land and just treat it like, and just cut it and just call it a day, until we can maybe pave it or something, put actual pavers down. We're just going to give it back. That's what we've landed on this year, because it's too much. So we're working on just like letting it fill in and just whatever. But I think there's a combination method that I think is acceptable. I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but we have to understand too, a lot of our food has Roundup already built into it. You know what I mean? And so it's like, what makes it so where they can use it? And then even if you try not to, you go to a restaurant, you're already eating it. So why can't I use just a little bit of it? You know what I mean? And it's like this crazy path to go down. And I feel like it's like, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. It's kind of, it's not right to feel that way, but I guess I just feel that way. I am who I am.
Yeah. Do you want to be a part of the problem or part of the solution? Right. I also, there, like 90%, maybe 80% of the time, I'm really reasonable. Yeah. Right.
It's a high number.
What I am here to acknowledge is, at the opening, I talked about how you either have basically no weeds, you have some weeds that you need to manage, and you have a lot of weeds. Remember, I said I was in that middle category. What I won't do is, pretend like I wouldn't take what I'd consider an extreme step if I didn't have weeds crawling all over me as I walked out of my back door, right? So I have enough where I feel like it's manageable. I can still grow kick butt, veggies and herbs and things. Like, did it impact the size of my onions? Maybe, but probably what more so impacted them was how late I planted them. All in all, it's not disrupting my garden and impacting my food greatly. So I'm leaving room for, in the case where it is, for you to make decisions that's best for you in your garden space. I'm not using the word but, because we know, how that saying goes. I'm also leaving room for, there are a lot of things that we can make easy in our lives. And I'm oftentimes really interested in how quickly we kind of throw what our thoughts and I'm going to stop short of saying morals are, our garden morals are, to the wind, because something is out there in a spray bottle that's easier.
Yeah, it's tough, I know, like, in your specific use, I was doing some research when we were looking at the fire pit, and there was a guy, and he kind of felt the same way I did. He didn't use a lot of herbicides, but he lived on a big farm, and he had a huge, long fence, right? And I guess he didn't want the weeds growing on it because it would rot the wood and stuff like that. So what he would do is twice a year, he would get on his, four-wheeler or something, and he would spray a brush killer right on the base of that and just keep it knocked down. So it's like, okay, like, I get the purpose of that, because he's not going to go out and weed 3 miles of fence or, whatever it was. So it's like, I get the purpose of that. And he was like, I don't use it a lot. I just do it in the, spring or whatever, and then fall or something. I don't know what it was, but it kind of did, kind of help knock that stuff back. And so I get it. You know what I mean? I get the purpose of that. But the problem I would have is like, I got to weed in my garden. Let me hit it. It's like, well, I don't think that's really a good use for that, but I know people that do that. So when it comes to herbicides and stuff, I think that like a gentle approach is fine, but you shouldn't rely on it. We should definitely be trying to take it, to learn how to get ahead of it in a more natural way. One could argue that buying a tarp made of plastic is not good either.
Hello.
And that's the sick part of it, and when I say sick, it's like, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, no matter which way you look at it.
Yeah. How long does the trace of that herbicide really stay in the soil? And that soil is not going anywhere. Even if you dig it up and throw it out, like, it's going somewhere, it's still here. Right. And then you think about, all of my containers are plastic.
Right.
So I try to be that 80% of me tries not to get on a high horse about things. But you believe what you believe, right? You make the choices you make. And that's the reason why I encourage folks to, do what you feel is best for your garden. And guess what? Accept that what you feel like is best today may be different in 5 years, maybe different in 10 years,
It's okay to flip-flop.
And that's okay too.
It's okay to flip-flop. But you're allowed to learn and change.
Yeah, sometimes you need to go extreme to get some wins under your belt.
Well, that was the whole thing with our and I mean, I remember getting off the podcast and I talked to you, and I remember you were like, "Man, just do what you feel like you need to do." And I really needed to hear that at the time, and I was really glad that we did it because, well, at first we thought we were making headway. Hindsight, if we had not decided to give it back, I would probably go out there and do it again, but I would. The problem is you can't really make a tarp to fit that area, But, as far as it comes to like using plastics and stuff for like that, the way I look at it is I don't mind using it if I'm going to use it to its bitter end until it is absolutely useless. That's when I feel okay with using it. As a one-time use, that's not really my thing. And I can see the world getting away from that more and more now. You're seeing a lot less plastics being used, and the microplastic discussion has really kind of popped up. We're going way off course here, but that's part of it. But, getting into the time of year to get rid of the weeds, now is the perfect time because they're dropping their seeds. So if you've got a space that you've kind of given up on, drop that tarp, take advantage of the sun. You're going to solarize it first of all. And then as it cools off, anything left will come, and pull that tarp up, give it some water, act like you're growing something, turn that soil and bring those seeds up and you'll get it. But I stand firm in hand pulling, and continuous planting will always help you because you're going to, over time, you will get control of that.
And heavy mulching. Mulching
is something we have not, and I hate that we didn't talk about it till now. It's been mentioned, but mulching is absolutely key. Because suppressing them, keeping them knocked down. And that's really, like, to me, that's your final step. Is like, that's your maintenance mode is mulching. And when we say mulching, we don't mean a centimeter. We mean inches of mulch. And there's no better mulch for blocking weeds than wood chips. I just don't like them in my garden. I've found too many negative effects from it. We've gone through that ad nauseum. But, leaves, stuff like that, and grass clippings. And I know everybody's like, well, if you use grass clippings you could put seeds in there, and it's like, yeah, you could, but it's going to be minimal compared to if you just let it go crazy. You know what I mean? And if you're staying on top of cutting grass, you're never getting that seed, that weed seed. So there's both, there's arguments to either side of it, but the one thing that I think we can all agree on is less weeds in your growing space, the more productive your garden will be. What do you think?
I agree. I don't know that I want to spend a whole lot of time with the rebuttal. That's truly just me agreeing with you. I agree. I think that like unsexy gardening, weeds is like the episode name, right? It's like the reason why it's Katie, right?
Yeah, Katie.
The reason why I love this question is like, you're serious about this.
Yeah.
Meaning like you're serious about growing. And that's not because you're a Chicago neighbor, because we all are serious about growing and tackling something. And again, no one's flashing pictures of their weeds, like it's not something that people are celebrating or even celebrating like the before and after of it all. Although I have posted a picture here or there. It's like, look at where I started. Look at where I am. But it can be a deficit to your garden, right? Detrimental to your garden. And I do believe that it's our job as stewards of this space to do what's best for the things we want to grow, which sometimes means attacking the things that we don't want.
Right. So there you go. Now, before we get on to our listener question of the day, I do want to say to a shout out to our video sponsor, which is us. Come check out our seed shop, the Backyard Garden Seeds. We got a question recently that asked, Why are we selling seeds? There's enough seed companies out there. Well, we are selling seeds because these are all different seeds that Batavia and I have grown in our gardens at some point, and we enjoy them, and we want to share our experience with our listeners to you for seeds for your garden. So, come check out the link below. It's on Etsy, so you can do that. We have, what do we have in there? We've got our fall and spring seeds, and soon we will have like our tomatoes and peppers. When it gets to be about time to buy those, we'll start doing that. So those will be coming. I'm not going to say soon, but they'll be coming shortly. Let's put it that way. It's kind of a pain to package all these seeds, but come check it out, please. It really does help support the show. Anything you do helps support us. You can become a subscriber. You can come see our YouTube channels and subscribe as long as you watch the videos. Anything like that helps keep us on the air so we can help share gardening with the world and give our 2 cents. Because everybody knows gardening, everybody's got 2 cents, right? I like to think that we have 3 cents, but I don't know.
Sometimes it feels like I have a wooden nickel.
Well, if you can figure out how to spend it, you'd be all right. But we have a question that came from Facebook on the Backyard Gardens Community Garden. We recently put a post up about questions of the day about late summer. So if you would like to partake in that, we will pin it to the top. I forgot to pin it, so it kind of got lost in all the posts. But this is from Bethany. Hey, Bethany. I'm trying here. Work with me.
Sorry, girl.
I'm trying, Batavian Bethany. So she writes, this is a late summer, early fall question, but how do you know when to put your fall seedlings in the ground? I'm in zone 6B, and it's not uncommon to have high temperatures regularly in the 80s or even 90s well into September. The last thing I want is for my brassicas and other cool weather seedlings to bolt before they've even had a chance to grow. But I don't want to wait too close for the first frost either. Do you have a trick for finding that sweet spot? Thanks. And then somebody else writes they've had struggles with it in the past. And Grace.
Hey, Grace.
She says, I'm in 7B, and I love this question because we all know around that time it can go from 80 to 40 real quick. Roller coaster heartbreak zones, roller coaster weather. We got you, baby. This is how it goes. So what is your take on it?
I'm leaning in because there is a question that we answer from Grace, and I wonder if it's the same Grace. And I just love the name Grace.
I bet she has a lot of grace.
It makes me smile.
So, I mean, look, it's all about cooling it down, right? We know what the problem is. It gets 80s to 90s, so we've got to find ways to cool it down. Water, mulch, and shade. That's the key.
Yeah.
And it's, and if you don't have a way to add shade, the best thing if you don't have a crazy scenario with sun, the best way to add shade is just put shade cloth directly over top of your garden, and it'll block that midday heat. For me, it's a little bit different. I have to angle mine down towards one direction because I get a lot of afternoon sun, which is really hot. And when I did that last year, I had a gap in the front. Well, the whole row died, but everything behind it survived. And just remember that it's a lot of water to keep these cool season plants happy. So water, shade, mulch. And that's really, that's all you can do.
Yeah, I think that logistically, starting with your average first frost date, and we've covered this in some recent episodes, average first frost date, and then counting backwards and mapping that to the seed to harvest time frame that's expected for your various plants, giving, young Ben says 7 to 14 days. I'm going to sit right at 14 because that feels warm and fuzzy. Adding a cushion of an additional 7 to 14 days, 1 to 2 weeks on top of that. And that backs you into when to plant the seedlings. And then all of what young Ben said about kind of that protecting of them. When she said she's in 6B, which in my mind, it's kind of like, this is the trouble with zones, right? It's like,
could be anywhere.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. The coolness yeah, we're about right when it comes to cold, but shoot, September, 90 degrees. Again, it's a 5-alarm fire around these parts. That's a rarity for us here in Chicago.
Well, she never said she's from Chicago. She could be from.
I know she
could be from Broadleaf, Plantain County.
That's the reason why I commented
you didn't get my
on
joke.
how there's a feeling of a kindred spirit when she said 6B, but then when she came back around with the temperatures, I'm like,
Yeah.
nope.
Yeah, and I was just talking to somebody on our live, on my live the other day, and we were talking. Somebody was like, "I live in Zone 8B. When should I start this?" I'm like, "Hell, I don't know." And we were getting into where like I'm in 8B, such and such is in 8B in another state, but we have totally different growing conditions. But anyways, back to it. Yeah, 90s is tough, but you'd be surprised how well. And what we have to remember too is the nights are generally cooler then, so there's more reprieve. So, and you're going to continuously get cooler, so you're going to have to kind of balance it. But it's just really that recipe, man. Water, mulch, and shade. And then just going from there.
Yeah, and keep a real close eye on, we're going to get some afternoon showers. It's been such a weird summer so far with our weather here in Chicago. So I'm hoping that I'm able to lean into that for my fall growing. As we're getting, a lot of overcast, a lot of, showers, like, afternoon showers and such. And so I am keeping my makeshift shade covering on hand as these seedlings are starting to emerge. But I'm also balancing, I need them to get that energy from the sun to grow. Just based on the number of days I have into my average first frost.
Well, and the thing is the shade covers are, a percentage. So there is still light getting through. It's not like you're going up and putting a black tarp over and saying, like,
did you hear me say my makeshift shade?
Oh, yeah, I did. Well, that's your problem.
Yeah. It sounds like a me problem.
Sorry to be direct about that, but that's, I don't know. Anyways, yeah.
You try to cheat the system, sometimes you get cheated.
Well, I've done that a lot, and I've found out that sometimes it's just best not to cheat the system. But that being said, I mean, even if you did put it directly overhead, let's just say you put a black tarp overhead or a piece of, hell, you built a deck over it. Like, you're only going to miss like a couple hours of sunlight. So it's not the end of the world, but it will help cool it. So just make sure you do that. And airflow, all that stuff, just make sure you're getting air in there. But I can tell you one thing, those plants, I think they will survive without a shade as long as you water them consistently and well.
Yep.
And you're going to have to water them more than you would your tomatoes that are probably in the next bed over. So just think about that. But you also have to remember too, as it cools off, don't forget to remove your shade. I have made that mistake. So it is a vicious dance, but I have definitely, my heart goes out to anybody who has to deal with wild temperature swings because it is difficult. And that's it. If you'd like to be like Bethany or even Amanda or Grace, who all commented on this post, you can do so at Backyard Gardens Community Garden on Facebook. Or if you want to be like Katie, you can send us an email to bygquestion@gmail.com. Just because you send a question there does not mean we'll make an episode of it. We just thought that it would be a good episode. Or I did. Batavia, did you think it turned out okay?
I'm actually pretty pleased.
There you go.
I'm glad that we had this conversation. I think that sometimes the things we talk about in these episodes are like, and maybe a part of what we hope is that this is what these episodes mean to the listener. It is the nudge that I need. It's the reminder that I need, right? It's definitely it's just not happening in my garden feel. Of course, that, that's something I get out of it. But yeah, it's one of those bits of, it's very easy to let this thing get away from you and then regret it later.
Yeah, I've been, during this episode, I've sat here and as we've thought, I'm moving the wild garden and I have a plan, but it's like, I might want to step it up and get on the weed control a little bit sooner. I think I'll be happier in the long run if I do that. So, it's definitely good to sit there and do that. And I hope that's what's done to somebody else. Just pull weeds. You're going to get on top of them. Katie, just keep going. Keep going. You'll get on top of them.
It probably seems obvious, but don't put them in your compost if you.
Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah, I throw them in the woods. But I've thrown them in the trash. Usually if I pull a big weed up, I'll throw it in the middle of the driveway and just let it dry out and die. But yeah. So there you go, everybody. Come buy some seeds. Come join us on Backyard Gardens Community Garden. Send us an email. Get the planter app. Do all these good things. And love your garden. And don't love your weeds. We got to go out. We got to be ruthless. And we have to kill weeds. And we have to get rid of them and exterminate them. And have a good day. Because we're going to learn to grow and grow for change.
See you in the weed pile.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by checking out our seed shop below. We have all kinds of seeds available for you, and we're going to be adding new seeds shortly, so check that out. Get yourself some seeds. It's free shipping, over $35 orders. So go ahead, get a full garden. What are you waiting for? Order your seeds and stock up. Or you can become a subscriber. You can either be an Apple subscriber or a patron, and that will help support the show. You'll get one free episode every month, an extra episode, that is. So we definitely would love to see you over there and become part of our crew. Join the Backyard Gardens Community Garden in Facebook. That's free. Go ahead, join that, and join the community where all the listeners get together and they can help each other out with their trials and tribulations and just show off their gardens. There's not a better way to do it. And if you're curious about what's going on in our gardens, you can check out our individual YouTube channels. So I'm at Sandy Bottom Homestead, and Batavia is at Be Better Garden. You can check that out and see how each of us are growing and what we talk about on those, because a lot of times we will coincide with the podcast and help add information in that maybe we didn't get out in the show or we feel that's pertinent at a certain time of year. So check that out and enjoy seeing our gardens and what we do in them. And we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.